London, 1819. Snow fell upon the city like sifted lace, softening its edges while gas lamps burned like faint, trembling stars. Beyond the frost-flecked windows of Ravenshire House, the world glittered with splendor. Music, laughter, and the delicate chime of crystal filled the air. The Duke's annual winter ball was an event whispered about for weeks before and long after. Tonight, every titled family in London had gathered beneath his chandeliers, where scandals sparkled as brightly as the jewels. At the far end of the ballroom, where candlelight dimmed and conversation softened, stood Lady Marianne Ashford. Her gown, of pale ivory silk long past its fashionable season, spoke more of memory than wealth. Yet there was something quietly arresting about her presence, an unassuming grace that asked for no one's attention yet held it all the same. The daughter of a once distinguished but now forgotten house, she had learned to move as one unseen. From where she stood, she could see him. The Duke of Ravenshire. Edward. The name she dared not speak even in thought, for it stirred too much of what she had spent years burying. 8 years had passed since she last called him friend, since childhood laughter beneath sunlit gardens gave way to the silence of propriety and distance. Now he was a man of command and elegance, his dark gaze sharp, his smile composed, his every movement watched. The orchestra swelled, and with it, the sound of silk and whispered envy. The Duke bowed before the daughter of the Marquis of Stourbridge, a perfect match, society would say, a union of wealth and legacy. He offered his hand, and the young lady curtsied with practiced grace. Marianne's heart did not shatter. Hearts do not break so loudly. They dissolve quietly, like frost melting under flame. She turned away before the dance began, retreating toward the edge of the room where the light fell thinner. From the corner, she could hear laughter ripple, soft, deliberate, cruel. "Poor Miss Ashford," a woman's voice murmured, sweetened by malice. "Still haunting the fringes of elegance, I see. One might mistake her persistence for pride." Another joined in, or desperation. "Perhaps she believes her employment grants her invitation." Laughter, delicate but poisonous, followed. Marianne stiffened but did not turn. She had learned that dignity, once defended too fiercely, could seem like defiance. So she smiled faintly, as if their words were air, and kept her gaze upon the marble floor. Inside, however, she felt the familiar ache of invisibility, the weight of knowing she existed only as a shadow in rooms that once held her as a guest. Unseen to her, across the room, Edward's eyes had found her. Perhaps it was habit, some echo of old familiarity, or perhaps guilt, a sensation he seldom allowed. He had not meant for her to attend this evening, though he had not forbidden it either. Lady Charlotte, his younger sister and Marianne's pupil, had insisted that her governess deserved a night beyond her duties. He had agreed, almost absently, never considering what it might stir. Yet now, watching her among the gilded and perfumed, he felt the faintest unease. Marianne moved quietly through the throng, exchanging polite words with those who would still acknowledge her. Her composure was flawless, her voice even, her manners immaculate, the armor of a woman determined not to falter. Yet beneath that calm lay exhaustion. 8 years of silence, of loving a man she could never claim, had taught her restraint too well. She was proud of her self-control, though it had come to feel like slow suffocation. A footman approached, offering champagne. She declined, preferring the comfort of retreat. As she stepped toward the French doors leading to the terrace, a flash of laughter cut through the air once more. The Marquis's daughter, resplendent in blue silk, had stumbled mid-dance. Edward's quick hand caught her, earning applause and murmurs of admiration. The image burned itself into Marianne's memory, cruel and tender all at once. The cold met her like truth as she stepped outside. The terrace was deserted, the gardens below blanketed in snow. Frost clung to the iron railings, and her breath rose in small silver clouds. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music fade behind her. Here, at least, there were no whispers. Only the muted hush of winter, indifferent and clean. In the quiet, she allowed herself to remember the afternoons when she and Edward, as children, had raced across meadows, their laughter echoing like a promise. His kindness then had been simple, uncalculated. But kindness fades when titles harden, and affection, unspoken, turns to distance. He had become the Duke, And she, the daughter of a man ruined by debt and disgrace. What right had she to still love him? None, she knew. And yet, love does not consult reason. Inside, the waltz ended to applause. Marianne turned, faintly visible through the frosted glass. Edward was surrounded by admirers. The flicker of his expression was unreadable, poised as ever. A man burdened by expectation could not afford to appear moved. But as his eyes drifted briefly toward the terrace doors, something in him paused. He saw her silhouette framed by the snowlight, still and solitary. A memory stirred, a girl with laughter in her eyes, unspoiled by sorrow. He felt, for the first time in years, the weight of his own choices. The alliances pursued, the distance maintained, the silence kept when words might have changed everything. And in that moment, watching her retreat further into the night, a quiet pang of regret passed through him. He told himself it was nothing. But the ache lingered. Marianne drew her shawl closer and descended the steps into the garden. The snow crunched softly beneath her slippers. Each breath rose like a prayer she dared not speak. She had promised herself she would endure tonight, that she would watch him one last time without breaking. But endurance, she realized, was a brittle thing. The wind carried faint laughter from the ballroom, fading with distance. Here, beneath the pale moonlight, she could almost pretend she was free. Free of memory, of love, of the cruel symmetry of longing without hope. Her gloved hands trembled as she brushed a snowflake from her cheek. Behind her, the doors opened. She turned, startled, but saw no one, only the faint echo of footsteps retreating. She thought she had imagined it, yet something in the air had changed. The feeling of being seen lingered. She hesitated, her heart unsteady, then turned back toward the glowing house. Through the glass, she could see him once more, standing apart from his guests, his gaze fixed not on the woman beside him, but upon the terrace where she stood. Marianne lowered her eyes, unwilling to hope. Hope had never been kind to her. Yet as she stepped back into the shadow of the garden arch, a single thought flickered like candlelight. Perhaps, for the first time in years, he had truly seen her. And though she would not know it until much later, that fleeting glance, the moment between silence and recognition, was the first fracture in the wall that had kept them apart for 8 long years. The music swelled once more inside the ballroom, bright and careless, but beneath the snow-lit sky, something had shifted. A heart once still had begun, almost imperceptibly, to stir. Morning light crept through the high windows of Ravenshire Manor, painting pale gold across the study walls where Marianne sat, pen in hand. The world beyond the glass was misted with frost. The garden still hushed in the breath of early winter. Lady Charlotte had yet to rise, and in these quiet hours, Marianne often wrote in her journal. Letters never sent, thoughts never spoken. They were her only rebellion, small confessions bound in ink. Yet today, her pen lay idle. Her mind was still tangled in the memory of the night before. The laughter, the whispers, the unbearable beauty of him beneath the chandeliers. She had not seen him since. The Duke had been engaged with guests well past midnight, and by the time she'd returned to her modest chamber, the manor had gone still. She had told herself that it no longer mattered, that she would endure as she always had. But endurance was a fragile armor. It cracked beneath memory. As she gathered her papers, something unusual caught her eye. Resting atop her desk was a small velvet box, the kind used for jewelry. No note accompanied it. Her pulse quickened. She hesitated before touching it, uncertain whether to trust her own curiosity. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a silver locket, simple yet exquisite, its surface engraved with the crest of Ravenshire. When she opened it, a faint scent of pressed violet rose from within, and beneath the flower lay a folded strip of parchment. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. Some things never fade. The handwriting was unmistakable. For a long moment, Marianne could not move. The room seemed smaller, her breath shallower. This could not be. He would never risk such impropriety. A gift from a duke to a governess? Even whispered, it would be ruinous. Yet there it lay, gleaming softly in her palm, impossibly real. Her first thought was to return it at once, to spare them both the peril of gossip. Her second thought, more dangerous, was to press it to her heart. In the silence, she did neither. A knock startled her. Quickly, she shut the box and slid it beneath her writing folio as a young maid entered with tea. The girl's eyes flicked to the desk. Too quick, too knowing. "Will there be anything else, Miss Ashford?" she asked with a smile that lingered. Marianne dismissed her gently, but the unease remained long after the door had closed. By midday, the manor buzzed with the gentle hum of routine. Lady Charlotte prattled about the evening's assembly, chattering of gowns and suitors while Marianne guided her through French grammar and history. Her composure never faltered, though her thoughts wandered ceaselessly to the hidden locket. The Duke did not appear that morning, nor at luncheon. She told herself this was for the best. But rumors are seeds that need no tending to grow. By the following day, faint murmurs stirred among the household. A maid had seen a velvet box. Another claimed to have noticed Miss Ashford blushing when her name was called in the Duke's presence. Whispers, soft and poisonous, began to curl through the corridors. When the Duke entered the drawing-room that afternoon, the air shifted. Marianne rose from her seat instinctively, her heart unsteady. He greeted his sister warmly, then turned to her. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice courteous yet measured, "might I have a word?" Lady Charlotte, oblivious to the undercurrent, nodded eagerly. "Yes, do speak to her, Edward. She's been most patient with me today." He led Marianne toward the library, a room heavy with oak and silence. The door shut softly behind them. "You received something," he said, not as a question but as fact. Her breath caught. "I did, my lord." He studied her, his gaze unreadable. "And have you guessed from whom?" "I have no need to guess," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I do not understand why." He exhaled slowly, his composure thinning. "Because it was owed to you long ago," he said. "Because I have thought of that night 8 years past more than I ought. And because I am a coward who remembers too much." Her heart ached at his candor. "Then you should not have sent it. You know what people will think." A bitter smile touched his lips. "People have thought worse of me for far less." She shook her head, stepping back slightly. "It is not your reputation I fear for, my lord. It is mine." For a moment, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the stillness. Then he said softly, "You keep it, Marianne. For yourself alone. No one need know." She wanted to refuse, to restore the fragile distance that protected them both. Yet the earnestness in his tone, so unlike the polished Duke the world saw, undid her. Still, she forced composure into her words. "I am your sister's governess. You must never forget that." "I forget it every time you look away from me," he replied. Her breath trembled. "Then you must learn to remember." The door opened suddenly. Lady Ravenshire, his mother, entered, her expression cool and assessing. "Edward," she said, her gaze flicking between them. "I did not know Miss Ashford's lessons included private conferences." Marianne curtsied immediately, her cheeks burning. "We were discussing Lady Charlotte's progress, Your Grace." "I see," the Duchess said smoothly. "Let us ensure such discussions occur in daylight and in the presence of propriety, shall we?" Marianne murmured assent, then excused herself, heart pounding. She knew what that tone meant. The Duchess's words would find their way into sharper mouths before the day's end. By evening, the manor brimmed with unspoken tension. At dinner, the servants' eyes darted, and the guests' smiles carried curiosity disguised as courtesy. The Duke was unusually silent, answering conversation with polite brevity. Marianne took her meal separately, as was customary for her station, though even in solitude she could feel the weight of their speculation pressing against the walls. In her chamber, she unwrapped the locket once more. It gleamed in the candlelight, innocent and damning all at once. She thought of returning it to his study with no note, no explanation, only the silent mercy of distance. Yet she could not bring herself to move. A faint knock came at her door. When she opened it, a servant stood with a sealed letter. "From the post, miss. Arrived just now." She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. It was from a Mrs. Abernathy, an old acquaintance now living in Vienna. The words were brief but kind. "A position has opened for a governess in my household. I should be honored if you would consider joining us by spring." Marianne sat back, the letter trembling in her hands. Vienna. A city far from whispers, far from impossible feelings. A place where silence might not hurt so much. Outside, snow began to fall once more, soft against the windows. She folded the letter carefully, her decision forming as surely as the frost upon the glass. Tomorrow, she would write her reply. Inside the library below, the Duke stood before the fire, staring at the empty decanter on the table. His mother's words echoed in his mind, "A duke cannot afford sentiment with servants." He closed his eyes, seeing instead the way Marianne's hand had trembled when she touched the locket. "Some things never fade," he had written. But some things, if ignored too long, are lost entirely. Above, unaware that he stood beneath her room, Marianne whispered to the dark, "It must end, Edward, before it destroys us both." And though her voice could not reach him, some unspoken part of him seemed to hear. For in the silence that followed, he felt the first true fear of his life, the fear that he was already too late. The snow fell heavier that night, veiling the grounds of Ravenshire Manor in silence. Lanterns flickered along the courtyard walls, their light quivering against the white drifts. Within the great house, the hour had grown late. Most of the servants had long since gone to bed, and only the echo of the wind stirred through the corridors. Marianne stood before her small trunk, hands trembling as she folded the last of her gowns. Tomorrow, before dawn, the carriage would take her to London, and from there she would sail for Vienna. Her resignation letter had been sent earlier that day, brief and formal. She had not seen him since. It was better that way. Love, once a wound, had now become a quiet scar. Yet as she placed the final ribbon into her case, her resolve began to waver. The locket still lay upon her desk, catching what little moonlight entered through the frost-streaked window. She had intended to leave it behind, to let it become another secret buried in this house of unspoken things. But the thought of it remaining here, of him finding it later, was unbearable. Slowly, she reached for it, closing her fingers around the silver warmth. "No ghosts," she whispered to herself. "No regrets." Downstairs, the last embers in the hearth glowed faintly. The household slept. Her cloak hung by the door, and her travel papers waited upon the table. She could almost hear the steady rhythm of hooves in the distance, her escape taking form. But before she could move toward the waiting carriage, a voice cut through the hush of the hall. "Marianne." Her breath caught. He stood at the end of the corridor, half in shadow, dressed not in formal attire but in a dark coat hastily thrown over his shirt. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those calm, guarded eyes, were alive with something fierce, something unrestrained. She turned away, her composure trembling. "You should not be here, my lord." "And yet I am," he replied, stepping forward. "They told me you were leaving. Tonight." "I have accepted another position abroad," she said, her voice steady though her heart faltered. "It is better this way." "For whom?" "For both of us." She forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. "There is nothing here for me but whispers and humiliation. You must see that." He took another step, his tone low, urgent. "You would run from me without a word?" "What word could I possibly leave you, your grace?" she answered quietly. "Anything I say would be called ambition. Any feeling, presumption. I have no right to either." "Do not speak to me as if I am the world," he said sharply. "You owe it nothing, nor do I." Her eyes lifted to his, filled with sorrow. "You owe it everything. You were born to it. I was born to its pity. That is the difference between us, and no sentiment can alter it." He exhaled, his restraint fracturing. "Marianne, for 8 years I have buried what should have been spoken. Do you know what silence becomes after so long? It rots the heart." She shook her head. "Please." "No," he interrupted, closing the distance between them. "You will hear me now. I have thought myself noble for keeping distance, for protecting you from scandal. But the truth is simpler. I was afraid. afraid of my own weakness, of the hunger I felt every time I looked at you and knew I could not have what I wanted. Her hand trembled where it clutched the locket. And what is it you want, my lord? Pity. Forgiveness. He looked at her then, and the mask he had worn for years fell away. You. The word hung in the air, fragile and irrevocable. She stared at him, her heart caught between disbelief and longing. You cannot mean this. You cannot undo the years by a single word. Then let me prove it, he said, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath against the cold. Tell me to stop, and I will. But if there is even one corner of your heart that still remembers what we were before the world divided us, then stay. She felt the tears before she knew she was crying. You ask for something cruel. You know what the world will say. Let it speak, he murmured. Let it call me a fool. I have been one long enough. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. The wind pressed softly against the windows, carrying the faint toll of midnight from the distant church bell. Marianne's fingers loosened, and the locket fell open in her hand. The violet within had dried, its color faded to pale gray. She looked at it, then at him. If I stay, she whispered, it will not be as your secret. He met her gaze without hesitation. Then stay as my truth. Her breath shuddered, torn between fear and yearning. Every rule she had lived by, every wall she had built to keep her dignity intact, trembled before the force of his words. And yet, she saw in him not the Duke of Ravenshire, but the boy she had once known, the one who had chased her laughter through the summer fields, who had promised her the world before titles and duty had come between them. The door to the courtyard creaked open as a gust of cold wind swept through, scattering snow across the marble floor. The waiting carriage stood beyond, lanterns dim in the storm. Marianne turned toward it, then back to him. 8 years, she said softly. Do you know how long that is to love someone in silence? His reply came as barely more than a breath. Every day of it. The distance between them vanished. He took her hand, lifting it to his lips, his voice unsteady. Forgive me for every moment I let the world come before you. Her tears fell freely now, though her smile was faint and trembling. And forgive me, she whispered, for every moment I wished you would not. Outside, the snow fell heavier, cloaking the world in white. The horses shifted, their breath rising like smoke, waiting for a journey that would never begin. She placed the locket back into his hand. Keep it, she said. You sent it as memory. Let it now be promise. He closed his fingers around it, his expression breaking with something raw and beautiful. Then I shall never let it fade again. The wind softened. The lanterns flickered. She stepped into his arms, not as governess or guest, but as the woman he had finally allowed himself to love. For a long, silent moment, they stood beneath the falling snow, the world hushed around them. Tomorrow, London would awaken to whispers. But tonight, in the stillness of Ravenshire, truth had found its voice. The carriage stood empty, its path untaken, as two hearts long divided began, at last, to beat in unison. Morning light spilled softly through the tall arched windows of Ravenshire Chapel, gilding the pews and the ancient stone floor in a quiet, golden warmth. The air was still except for the low hum of the bells overhead, their toll carrying across the estate like a gentle awakening. The night storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clear and pale. Snow draped the trees outside, glinting faintly as if the heavens themselves had offered their blessing. Marianne stood before the altar, her hands clasped tightly around a small bouquet of winter roses. Her breath came unevenly, not from fear but disbelief. How fragile, how impossible this moment seemed after years of silence. Only a week had passed since that night in the hall, the night she had chosen not to leave. Yet in that short span, the world she had known had shifted entirely. The Duke, Adrian now, as she allowed herself to think of him, had not hidden their reconciliation. To the astonishment of the household, he had made his intentions known the very next morning. Rumors had spread through the servants' quarters and beyond the gates of Ravenshire, but this time he had met every whisper with the calm defiance of a man who had nothing left to conceal. "Let them speak," he had said. "Let them say what they will. I will answer with truth." Now, standing in the chapel where generations of his family had been wed, Marianne felt the weight of centuries press gently upon her heart. A duchess she would soon be called, a title she had never dared to imagine, and yet it did not feel like triumph. It felt like peace, the kind that comes after storms have spent their fury, leaving only quiet skies in their wake. Adrian entered from the far side of the chapel, the sound of his boots soft upon the stone. He wore no grand regalia, only a simple dark coat and the signet of his house upon his hand. When his eyes found her, the rest of the world seemed to recede. 4 years they had circled one another in silence, bound by duty, fear, and circumstance. Now there was only honesty between them. "You came early," he said, his voice low but steady as he approached. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, smiling faintly. "I feared if I did, I might wake and find it was only another dream." He stopped before her, the faintest curve touching his lips. "I have had the same fear every morning since that night." For a long moment, neither spoke. The chapel was filled only with the quiet flicker of candlelight, the scent of roses and old stone. Then Adrian reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the silver locket, the one that had begun their undoing and, somehow, their redemption. It gleamed softly in his palm. "I kept it polished," he said, opening it so that the faded violet within caught the light. "You once told me flowers lose meaning when pressed. But perhaps it was not the flower that mattered, but the hand that kept it." Her eyes softened. "You never understood how much I treasured that foolish token," she whispered. "I should have thrown it away the night I first received it. Instead, I built my heart around it. And I built mine around regret," he murmured, "until you returned it to me." He reached for her hand and placed the locket against her palm. "This time, it is not a memory," he said. "It is a promise. Whatever the world may say, whatever storms may come, I will not let silence come between us again." Her fingers closed around it slowly, reverently. "Then neither shall I," she said. "We have both been too long alone in our own hearts." The doors of the chapel opened then, and the vicar entered quietly, nodding to them both. Behind him came Lady Eleanor, Adrian's elder sister, who had once warned him that love and rank could not coexist. Yet even she seemed softened now, her gaze warm as she approached. "Marianne," Eleanor said gently, taking her hand, "I misjudged you once. I thought silence meant submission, when it was strength. You have shown us all that gentleness can command more power than pride ever could." Marianne bowed her head slightly, her voice faint but firm. "I only followed what the heart knew, even when it was unwelcome." Eleanor smiled faintly and turned to her brother. "And you, Adrian? Perhaps now father will rest easier, knowing you've chosen not just a duchess, but a companion." Adrian's reply was quiet, but his eyes never left Marianne. "He taught me that honor is measured not in title, but in truth. Today, I honor both." The vicar raised his hand, and the small gathering fell silent. As he began to speak the vows, Marianne's thoughts drifted, not away from the moment, but deeper into it. She remembered her years at Ravenshire as governess, the long corridors filled with portraits she never dared to meet the eyes of, the nights spent writing letters she would never send, the way his voice would soften when he forgot to call her Miss Linton. She had loved him from shadows, certain that the sun was not for her. Now, standing in its light, she felt no triumph, only gratitude that her heart had endured long enough to see its faith rewarded. When it came time for the exchange of vows, Adrian spoke first. His tone was steady, his gaze unflinching. "I have walked through years of silence," he said, "believing it noble to keep love hidden. But I have learned that concealment is its own kind of cruelty. Before all who stand here, I vow to speak when truth demands it, to stand beside you when the world questions it, and to cherish you not as a secret, but as my equal." Her eyes glistened, and when she answered, her voice was quiet but sure. "And I vow," she said, "to stand beside you not because you are Duke, but because you are the man I loved long before I was allowed to speak it. I will not be your shadow, but your home." The words hung between them, sacred and complete. When the vicar finally declared them bound, the bells of Ravenshire began to toll, deep, resonant, alive. Their sound swept through the valley, echoing off the distant hills, as though the estate itself rejoiced. Outside, the villagers gathered at the gates to listen, unaware of the intimacy behind the sound. To them, it was merely the wedding of a duke. But within the chapel, it was something far greater, the mending of years, the quiet triumph of hearts that had dared to wait. Adrian lifted her veil, his hand lingering against her cheek. "At last," he whispered, "you are not a dream I have to wake from." She smiled, tears bright against the soft light. "Nor you a memory I must hide from." Their kiss was gentle, not the fevered rush of passion denied too long, but the calm certainty of two souls finding rest. When they parted, the snow had begun to fall again, slow and graceful beyond the chapel's glass. As they stepped outside, the bells still singing above them, Marianne looked back once. The great house stood in the distance, its windows bright and welcoming, no longer a prison of silence but a home reborn. Adrian took her hand, and together they walked forward, through the snow, through the murmurs of joy that followed them, into the life they had both longed for yet never dared to name. The world would still talk. It always did. But for once, the whispers at Ravenshire were not of scandal or shame. They were of love finally spoken, and of two hearts, once bound by silence, now free beneath the ringing of the bells.